Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. And today's webinar is on the topic, getting the right product mix for your extended learning or continuing education division. And we're happy to have Greg Marsello of LERN with us today as our presenter. And the webinar today is being brought to you by Augisoft. And for those of you who may be new to Augisoft, we are developers of a software tool called Lumens, which is an enrollment management or registration management system that's designed for the continuing education or lifelong learning market. But before we get started, I just wanted to run through just a real couple of basic webinar logistics. First off, just wanted to let you know that we're going to be asking a couple of polling questions throughout the course of the webinar today. So when we come to a polling question, you'll see those appear on your screen, and then we'll have about a minute or give you about a minute to respond, and then we'll continue on with Greg's presentation. Also, just wanted to let you know that we are going to set some time at the end for questions. So if you do have a question for Greg, please send that in through the questions box on the toolbar, and we'll take as much time as we can at the end to get to all of your questions. And then also just wanted to remind people that we do record the webinar, and we typically always provide a link to the recording as well as copies of the slides. So if you want to check back and review anything, or if you have colleagues that weren't able to attend live, we can always get copies of that to them by just going to that link that's right there on the screen, the augisoft.net/webinar. So with that, I think we're ready to go. And so Greg, I will turn things over to you. Welcome.
Great, thanks, Chris. And I hope everyone's having a good summer and it's not too hot. I'm in Rhode Island this week, and it's a little steamy here, although rumors have it it's going to start to cool off soon, which is nice. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Greg Marsello, and I am a co-founder of the Learning Resources Network. And LERN is an association that works only with continuing education, community education, corporate education programs. And we were founded in 1974. I'm considered a road warrior, and I'm on the road about 50 weeks every year visiting programs, and one of the things I do is called a program review, and that's when I take a look at programs from top to bottom and provide recommendations, and I do probably about 25 to 30 of those a year, so it really keeps me in tune to what's going on in the continuing ed business. Besides that, I operate a community education program based in Rhode Island, which is where I'm from, called Learning Connection. And I also do a lot of work with George Washington University in their business school and helping them with their event management certificate program and actually running that program for them, and so getting a sense of what they're doing from the certificate point of view also. Chris mentioned that Augisoft is sponsoring today's webinar, and back in the year 2000, Jem Erdem and I started to work together to build Lumens, which is a software system for our industry. And also, I put a lot of energy into time building LERN, what we call LERN software tools that are used to analyze registration data, programming data, marketing data, and contract sales data. So again, by having that ability to analyze the data, I'm getting, again, more information about what's working and what's not working with programs. And then lately, one of the projects I've been working on and actually have done with 3 or 4 programs over the last couple of months is helping build one-year plans, sort of a business plan for the coming year, which really has a continuing education spin to it. So again, really giving me a chance to understand, how programs are doing what they do. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about the right product mix. And I'm going to start off by just talking about some things that I consider sort of basics that would be reasons why we would want to have a right product mix. And then we'll sort of talk about what the critical components of ensuring you have a right product mix. So if my program has the right product mix, the assumption is I'm generating the most revenue or participants than I possibly can. My programs are driving people to register and spend money. Second is, my assumption is that my cancellation rate, both for my total offerings as well as just for my new offerings, will have a very low cancellation rate, meaning I'm doing a good job of selecting what it is that people are interested in. Third, that I'd have the right product mix if I'm having a very strong repeat rate, The repeat rate means you look at an individual, a person, and you see if they're repeating from one year to the next. So one of the things we always want to do is to get people to repeat, because that ensures that there's certainly interest there, but also selling someone who we already know is much easier than selling someone new. So the stronger the repeat rate, the assumption is I'm doing a good job with the product mix that I'm offering. The right product mix means that we're using the least amount of staff energy. That we're not having to spend a lot of time and energy to ensure we have the right product mix, but that we're trying to do this in an organized manner so that our programming staff can really focus on those new things and ensure that they can put the time and energy into getting those built. Also, we want to make sure that we're managing our product development dollars correctly. Some of us have money in our budgets for product development, some of us don't. And even if we don't, we actually are utilizing what I would call your production costs, your delivery costs, to help fund your product development. So no matter if we've got a budget line or if we're funding it ourselves, we need to make sure that we can manage those product development dollars. And then also we want to make sure that the right product mix is using our promotion dollars the best way possible. And so when I'm sort of just thinking in general about the right product mix, those are sort of areas that immediately jump out to me. So I want to make sure that my staff has critical guidelines that help them stay within these areas. So what I'm going to do now in the rest of the presentation is talk about those critical guidelines. And so whether you're in a recreation department or a public school or a university or a community college, and no matter what type of programming you're doing, you want to think about how do I use these guidelines to ensure that I stay on track with my programming and what I'm offering to the general public or a targeted public. So first of all, let's make it really clear that it is the responsibility of the programming professionals to ensure the product mix is correct. It's not marketing's responsibility. It's not operations' responsibility. It is the programming staff, people who are responsible for selecting, scheduling, etc., new and repeat programming. This is the key responsibility of the job. And one of the things that I talk about when I talk with programming professionals are about the different things that make up their job. But clearly, two of the key things that impact product mix are, one, the responsibility to determine which programs should be repeated by taking a look at whatever the data that needs to be looked at to make those decisions to decide what to repeat. And then the second thing is to ensure that we're offering or delivering or finding enough new programming to ensure that the mix that we're offering is as fresh as possible. And so there certainly are other responsibilities, but those are key responsibilities for someone who's doing programming. So as we talk about product mix, I'm assuming the people I'm talking to or the people who would be accountable are people who are handling the programming end of the business. It is important that we move more and more towards data-driven decisions. Some of the decisions are gut that we make. Even though we might have the numbers, we still may gut and say, I think this is going to work. But in general, if we're not looking at numbers and analyzing numbers to make decisions, especially about what to repeat, then that's not putting ourselves in a good position when it comes to the best selection possible. So it is important that we look at numbers. Sometimes, certainly, we're going to go by gut, but the numbers help making those gut decisions even better. And so one of the things that we talk a lot about at LERN is making sure that when you're building your classes into whatever software system you're using, that you are collecting the appropriate data that needs to be collected so that you're able to determine your cancellation rate. You're able to determine the average number of participants. You're able to determine the operating margin of your programs. And Lumens has all of this functionality built in. We actually have taken LERN tools and added them this summer into Lumens so that you actually can start to figure this stuff out even better on your own end. But those of you who aren't Lumens users, LERN has these software tools also available to you. The one that's most important for the programming side of the business is the LERN Program Planner, which allows you to know your cancellation rate, your average participants, your operating margin by class, course, subcategory, category level. And so now you start to see what's working and not working. And there's actually a component of the tool that is called repeat classes or courses that allows you to take a look at your classes by different parameters to determine which ones you should be repeating and which ones you shouldn't. So one key point is we've got to collect the right data so that we can make good decisions about the programming that at least we're presently offering. And we also can be watching the trends of what's performing the best to determine what else we should do like it. It is important when we think about programming that there is a structure to our business. And this is more certainly a product structure, and I'll talk about other structures in a moment. But let's assume that this is a continuing education unit I'm working with, and they've got continuing professional education, community education, and health. Let's say it's their 3 divisions. So continuing education is the unit, continuing professional ed, community ed, and health are the divisions. And then within each division, community ed as an example here, there are categories. So the categories are play, arts, and self. And then within each of the categories, there are subcategories. In this example, under arts, culinary, dance, and music. So one of the things that is important is that we've spent the time looking at the structure of our programming and that we have broken it into divisions. We have then broken divisions into categories, and then we have broken categories into subcategories. Most programs that I work with normally don't have more than 5 divisions, although there are some larger programs that do. When it comes to categories, normally you're going to have somewhere between 4 and 7 categories. And then within each category, you're going to have somewhere between 4 and 7 subcategories. So you want to think about that structure from the point of view of these are the blocks that I need to fill in. This is where my programming, these are the areas that I'm doing programming in. So an important piece is to be able to build this structure, have this structure to ensure that we do keep aware of all these areas that we do programming in. When it comes to the product mix and we think in terms of products, there are 3 ways to look at our mix. One is what we were just talking about, which is we look at things by product. We look at our computer programming versus our business programming versus our recreation programming, and that could be at a category, subcategory, whatever level. But that basically we analyze what's going on with our programs by products. And that's how most of us normally work. A lot of times recreation departments are a little bit more focused on what we'll talk about in a second, which are market segments. But in general, most organizations think in terms of products. So when we take a look at a website, we take a look at a printed catalog, we're normally seeing products. The second way is to think in terms of market segments. So I do programming for children, maybe middle school children. I do programming for Generation X males. I do programming for engineers. But basically, we're looking at our product mix as it relates to market segments and the segments that actually we are supporting. And normally when it comes to a good continuing education unit, they have about 7 primary market segments. So about 7 key segments are generating 80% or more of their revenue or registrations. So being able to know those market segments is really important. And then the third thing is delivery methods. How do we deliver? We deliver online, we deliver face-to-face, we deliver by contracts, we deliver camps, we deliver certificate programs, all the different ways that people can utilize our programs. And so when you think of your organization and when you think of yourself as a programmer, you want to be thinking about, well, what's my product mix, what's my market segment mix, and what's my delivery method mix. And it's not that one is better than the other. As I said earlier, the norm is we think in terms of products, but we also need to think in terms of market segments and delivery methods. So when we talk about the right product mix, we may have the right product mix, but do we have the right market segment mix? Do we have the right delivery method mix? And to me, when you think about the mix, what's important is what I call a 30% rule. And the 30% rule means that within your product areas or within your market segments or within your delivery methods, you don't want one product area or one market segment or one delivery method to be more than 30% of your business. Now, you may look at business by participation or by revenue. Most programs look at it by revenue. So let's just say that I don't want more than 30% of my business, of my revenue to come in from a product area point of view from business programming. Or I don't want more than 30% of my revenue to be coming in from a market segment point of view by middle school children. Or I don't want 30% or more of my business coming in from just face-to-face classes. And so what I'm doing here is ensuring that my portfolio is balanced. And a balanced portfolio allows people to enter in different ways, different product areas, different delivery methods, etc. It allows us to market in a more targeted way, by market segments, by delivery methods, by product areas. And so it provides us a lot more flexibility regarding how we run our business. So think in terms of earlier when we looked at that structure of a continuing ed unit, that was product area. You could do the same structure by market segment. You could do the same structure by delivery method. But as a programmer, what you want to make sure is that when you look at those mixes, either within product areas, within market segments, within delivery methods, that nothing's more than 30% of your business. Now, if something is, it certainly doesn't mean do less of it. It just means that over a period of time, we're going to want to try to beef up other things so that they reduce that amount, that other one's percentage, not dollar amount, but its percentage, so that you're not as needy of that product area, that market segment, or that delivery method. Another thing that's really important for you to be thinking about when you're thinking about market segments, so we're thinking about these segments, these people, middle school children, Generation X males, seniors, whatever types of groups you're working with, what you want to be thinking about is something called market potential and market share. Market potential is every single person you can reach, and market share is the percentage you have. Now, you might be in a community of 100,000 people, and you could say, gee, that's my market potential, and it is your market potential. But once you understand really who your key market segments are, you're going to realize that really 100,000 isn't my market potential. It might be 40,000 because the other 60,000 have no interest in all in what I'm doing. So my market potential is really 40,000. And when I look at that 40,000, now I start to take a look at how it breaks down by market segment. And so 10,000 of those, may be middle school children. 4,000 may be seniors. 8,000 may be Generation X males. And now I start to really understand sort of what my potential is. So there's a grand potential. It's everybody. We know that we're not going to reach everybody, so there's a realistic potential which is driven by our existing market segments. Each of those market segments has a potential, and then what becomes really critical by those market segments is the market share. So if, for example, with middle school children, the market potential was 5,000, and I had 1,000 as my market share, I'm doing pretty good, but also it means I've got a lot to work on there. I can grow this area. While if seniors, for example, my market potential is 4,000 and I've got 3,000, I'm doing okay. I've got a lot of them, but I don't have a lot of potential here, so there's not a lot of growth in this area. So certainly as someone responsible for programming, I want to understand my market segments. I want to know who they are, and then I want to understand their potential and their market share, because I'm going to want to try to grow the market segments that have more potential, more of a variance between potential and share. Or I may find some that there's a large potential, but I'm hardly selling anybody. And so one of the questions is, why am I not selling? Why am I not doing better with that market potential? So programming, you want to think about market segments. You want to think about what your potential and what your share is. I was saying before that repeat rate was important. And I believe that the most critical statistic in our business is repeat rate. And basically repeat rate means what percentage of your people, not registrations, but what percentage of your people are repeating from one period of time to a second period of time as a percentage of the first period. So if in the year 2011 I had 5,000 people register, and if in the year 2012 I had 6,000 people register, and 2,500 of those 6,000 had also registered the previous year, then that means my repeat rate is 50%. I had 5,000 registrations, 2,500 repeated, so my repeat rate was 50%. Ideally, in open enrollment class event programming, we want our repeat rate to be somewhere between 30 and 50%. If it's less than 30%, that means we're working really hard to get new people. And we grow our business on repeat customers by getting them to repeat and repeat more often. And that means that they're spending more money. And then what really is more important is the happier they are spreading the word by word of mouth to the people who are actually going to be the new people who are going to participate. So as a programmer, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm listening to my repeat customers so that I can make sure I'm fixing any problems they're having, as well as I'm giving them the programming they want. And when I say the programming, it's not just the topic, but it's the place, it's the time, it's the delivery method. It's all those things that we need to be attuned to ensure we're making the best selections possible. I always use this example, but back about 10 years ago, I was having the same discussion with a community college, and I was doing a training there. And that night, one of the people in the class went up to all his classes that were taking place that night and asked them, what time do you want classes to start? At 6, 6:30, or 7? And all the classes at that point started at 7. 86% of the people said 6 o'clock. So that meant two things. That meant, one, that the people who were coming really wanted to come because they weren't happy about the time. But the second thing it meant was that if he were to change the time to 6 o'clock, it's going to make the people who were coming happier, and it's probably going to have a positive impact on more enrollments. And when I saw him a year later, he said that his enrollments went up by 35% by making that change. So as a programmer, one of my jobs is really to be listening and finding the things out that need to be fixed or changed or done differently in order to get people to repeat. Normally the reason they don't repeat is A, the quality is poor. Normally our quality in continuing ed is good. B, the customer service is poor. And our customer service in continuing ed overall is considered pretty good. C, they have nothing new to sign up for. And a lot of times that's true because we're not doing enough programming, so there's nothing to come back to. I took that human resources certificate program, but there's nothing else now to sign up for. And then D is we're not doing a good job of target marketing to them, so we're not going after the people who we know want to repeat. For example, one of the reports that comes out of one of the LERN registration analysis tool is one that's called Next Course. And what Next Course does is it actually takes a look at the class you're signed up for, and it takes a look at everybody else in that class except you, and what else did they sign up for. So if you had like 10 people sign up for ballroom dancing, and out of those 10, 9 of them signed up for singing in the shower, and you didn't sign up for singing in the shower, well, why didn't you? And so we should be contacting them, and it's probably just because that person didn't know about singing in the shower. And so we need to be way more proactive, and that's why one of the new positions we're starting to see in continuing ed is customer retention. People's responsibility is getting people to repeat. But as a programmer, you've got to be selecting the right programs. You've got to be making the changes to ensure that people will come back. You have to do new programming. 20 to 30% of what you do needs to be new. And new is defined as brand new, you've never done it before, or redesigned. And redesign means that you haven't just sort of like changed a word in the description, but you've actually gone in and made this different from what it was before. So that you knew it wasn't working, it needed some revamping from a curriculum point of view, maybe it needed some revamping from a pricing point of view or whatever, but now you've taken it and you're reintroducing it as a new product. Some categories of programming may not have as high of a new, just because there's not as much new that you can do, and some might have a higher. So that's why I'm saying you want to be somewhere in that 20 to 30% range of new. And there's always a debate about, do you put new in your catalog and on your website, or don't you? I think if you're not doing much new, you should be putting new. If you do a lot of new and people know you do a lot of new, then I don't think it's as critical, because actually I think sometimes it may deter people from registering, because when they see it's new, they think, well, there's a greater chance that it will probably cancel. So that's a strategy decision you have to make, but if you're already doing a lot of new, I don't think it's critical to put new. I do think on your home page on your website and on the front of your catalog, you should be highlighting the amount of new you're doing. You should be talking to some of that new so that people can see the types of new things that you're offering this time around. Also, as a programmer, one of the key ways of critiquing your performance is cancellation rate, because cancellation rate really is reflective on how you're selecting the programming that you're doing. When we take a look at the overall cancellation rate, all your programming that you offer, your goal is to be at 15%. I would say that most programs these days are reporting between 20 and 30%, but people are working hard to try to get that percent down. And they're doing that by making decisions about canceling closer to the start, not offering too many sections of something, just offer it once or twice and then add additional sections later. Pricing so you can run the class for 5 or less people, so that you don't need 15 people for a class to run, because in general people are reporting that on an average, when I'm out in the field, that their average number of students is somewhere between 8 and 12. So if that's true, you're going to have a bunch of classes in that 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 range, and so you want to make sure to be able to price those so you can actually run those classes. And then another thing that impacts cancellation rate is materials fees. If you have a high materials fee, you want to make sure that you separate that out, because if I'm registering, I don't know the book's $50 unless you tell me the book's $50. When it comes to new programming, the cancellation rate for new programming is 30 to 50%. So new things are going to cancel at a much higher rate, and that's fine, because you got to be testing new things. Thus, this means that the repeat stuff should be canceling at about a 0 to 14%, so a much lower percentage. So having new things cancel is okay. That's not a problem. You wouldn't want something to run more than 3 times, though, before you either get rid of it, redesign it, or do something. People are really shifting to even 2 times if it hasn't run, but I would say if you're at least getting some people registering, you could go a 3rd time, because it does take time for people to be aware that it is in your brochure on your website unless you're actually doing a much more direct mail piece on it. So I think we'll cut in and do a poll right now, so go ahead, Chris.
All right, thank you, Greg. You should all now see the first poll question up on your screen, and the question is, what is your overall cancellation rate? And we have a couple of options for you to choose from, so you can just estimate or add in the one that fits you best, and then we'll read off the answers and move on with the presentation.
And I think, this whole issue of cancellation rate, some of the programs that I started to work with 15 years ago that really wanted to sort of improve their performance, the 2 benchmarks they zeroed in on first, one was cancellation rate, because the lower the cancellation rate, normally the more successful they were, and the second was operating margin, which we'll talk about in a minute, and that's really the profitability of your program. So, if you don't know your cancellation rate, that's a red flag in itself, because this is a number that you should know on a term-by-term basis, by a year basis, at a category, subcategory level, so you can really see where the problematic areas are.
Okay, let's see what people had to say. Right now, it looks like the majority, 35%, are in the 10 to 20% range. Then evenly between 21 and 30% and 31 and 40%, and then a few people, 9%, were at less than 10%, which is great, and then there were a small percent that were over 41%.
Great. Okay, good. Good. Well, that's good information for me to see. That's good information for others who are watching to see, too, just to give a sense of what's happening out there. The next area to take a look at is what we would call operating margin. So again, as a programmer, it is your responsibility to make sure that the programming you're offering is profitable. And if it isn't profitable, then why are we doing it? Now, one of the big confusions that takes place in our business, and this is something I've been hammering hard on the last couple of years, is that people are determining the profitability by adding in administrative costs. So, for example, what you're looking at here, consider this a culinary subcategory. We're just looking at culinary programming. And this past year, we generated $100,000. And this past year, we spent $15,000 promoting the programs. This was our marketing dollars. And then we spent $45,000 delivering the programming. This is the instructor fees, the materials, food, whatever it might be that supports the programming. And if we add the promotion and production together, we get what are called direct costs. These are the costs directly related to the programming side of the business. So these are my programming costs. This is what it's costing me to run this program. So that's $60,000 or 60%. And then if I take the $60,000 and I subtract it from the $100,000, that gives me my operating margin. So of the 100, I spent $60,000 of it promoting and delivering. I had $40,000 left, or 40%, to support my administrative costs within the organization. Those dollars are going in to support the day-to-day part of our business. When you look at either a category or subcategory of programming, or even an individual course or class, what you're concerned about is operating margin. You don't want to factor in administrative costs, because who knows what the administrative costs are that impact these dollars. I mean, everyone wears so many different hats, it's so very difficult to say that. All you want to do is make sure that that category, subcategory, course, or class is getting the operating margin it needs to get. And if it's getting that operating margin, then it's doing its job. If your administrative costs are too high, that's a completely separate issue. That has nothing to do with the programming itself. So when we look at our business, ideally, your operating margin should be 40% or better. Now, there's some programming, like children's programming, that might have an operating margin of 30% instead of 40%. But then there's some of the high-tech things people are doing, or high-dollar certificate programs that people are doing, that might have operating margins of 50 to 60%. So when we look at the overall continuing ed unit, we want to have an operating margin of 40%, so that when we're looking at our programming in general as a class programmer, I want to make sure that I'm getting an operating margin of 40%. I think what's also important to remember is that it's not just each individual class. Some classes will have a better operating margin than others. So that as long as, say, the subcategory has the appropriate operating margin, then that's what I should be interested in. Because some classes I'm going to run at break even, because I did get enough people to cover the cost to deliver the class, and I want to run that class, and I don't want to cancel people. But when I group it all together, I've got to be getting that 40%. So another thing as a class programmer we've got to be very attuned to is knowing what our operating margin is. One of the things there's a lot of confusion on when it comes to the right product mix is the difference between new offerings and new initiatives. A new offering is you're offering a new class. I'm doing business classes and I'm offering a new business class. A new initiative means I'm not doing any business classes, and now I'm going to start to offer business classes. So that I'm starting a whole new product area, or I'm going after a whole new market segment, or I'm developing a whole new delivery method. This is going to take time, resources, etc. And so the norm is with most continuing ed units, some larger ones it would be different, but for most continuing ed units, one new initiative a year is plenty. So we said earlier that 20% of our classes should be new. That's new offerings. But we need one new initiative each year, one new product area, one new market segment, one new delivery method. And the guidelines for that is that you should not be starting something if you don't think it's going to last for 3 years. So let's say your new initiative is summer camps for kids. Well, it's got to last 3 years. If you can't prove to me that it won't last 3 years, I would certainly say no. You've got to prove to me that by year 3, it's going to be generating $100,000 or 5 to 10% of your budget, your revenue budget. Because if it isn't, why put all this energy into it? You've got to prove to me by year 3 that it's going to have a 40% operating margin. Now, those 3 things you could probably fool me on. But the 4th one that's most critical is, why would you even do a new initiative if you don't have names to market it to? You don't know actually who this is going to be sold to. You're just going to sort of throw it in your catalog and hope for the best. Remember, it's not a new class. It's a new initiative. And it's going to take 3 years to roll it out. From the time you actually start to think about it till the time that it's fully rolled out is probably going to be a 3-year period of time. And so we've got to make smart decisions. Now, LERN teaches something called an 8-step needs assessment model that supports making these decisions. But again, when we talk about right product mix, I would argue that you ought to be offering 1 new initiative a year. So, Chris, I think we got another poll.
All right. Thanks, Greg. The next polling question now should be up on your screen. Does your continuing education unit have a process for the selection of new initiatives? And yes or no answer.
And I think this is really becoming more critical. I will say that I've been presenting on this topic a lot. People have been asking a lot of good questions about how to determine new initiatives. I wrote a small publication on creating new initiatives that speaks to the 8-step needs assessment model and how it helps you make good decisions about what should be the new initiatives. But you know, just remember back when computer programming was hot in the early 2000s, and all of a sudden it disappeared. And without other initiatives following it, then people's revenue dropped dramatically. So we need to not just be thinking about new classes, but also new initiatives.
All right. Let's wrap up the poll here and see what we have for responses. And it looks like the vast majority, 79%, said that they do not have a process at this point, and 21% said that they do.
So I think this is something to be thinking about. You know, and we've got LERN, we've got webinars that have been recorded on this, et cetera. There's, I said, a publication. I just think that one of the things, when I review programs, one of the reasons why programs are not successful, they're not doing well, is they're taking on too many new initiatives in 1 year. And you just can't do it and do it well, and the quality drops. So I just think this is something, and this is the programming area side, and this is the group that's responsible for this. So if you need more information on that, just let me know, and I'm happy to help you with that. Another thing that's important when we're thinking about programming is our relationship with marketing. So in the past, the way it was thought was, I'll develop a program, I'll give it to marketing, and marketing better be able to sell it because that's not my responsibility. Well, I would argue exactly the opposite. Marketing's responsibility is functional. Marketing's responsibility is to get done what needs to get done to get the word out. But if you develop a new certificate program, for example, marketing has no idea who your market segment is. Marketing has no idea what wording should be used that group wants to hear. Marketing has no idea what pictures ought to be used. And marketing doesn't have the list or know where to get the list. And so it really is your responsibility in programming to provide that guidance to marketing. After marketing has done it once or twice, a certain certificate program, then sure, they should be able to run with it. But at the very beginning, it is your job in programming to provide very specific information about what it is they need to know to be able to do their job. And then it's marketing's responsibility to do it right, to make sure it's on time, all those types of things. But you play a very key role. The other thing is that certainly if you listen to anything we say at LERN, we're saying that 75% of your marketing budget should be spent on printed materials. So we're certainly saying don't get rid of your printed materials. But we are saying that your printed materials are getting more and more targeted. So for example, here you're looking at the left on a general continuing education brochure. And that's good, covers lots of topics. You can do more of a mass mailing on it because the assumption is that there'll be something in there that'll interest somebody. But you don't know that. On the flip side, you're looking at the one on the right side, and this is for an event management certificate program, and that's all it's for. And so that's who it's geared for. And so a list can be generated of people who are in the business of event management, so they can be targeted to with a printed piece, with e-marketing, etc., so that they will then know about this and be able to get interested in it. But if someone receives the general continuing ed one and they're interested in event management, they may miss it. If they get the event management one, then clearly they're going to say, this is for me. And this is why it's so important, as I was saying a moment ago, as a programming professional, your job is to figure out who it is going to be mailed to. Because why would I go through all the energy of building an event management certificate program if I didn't know who I was going to mail it to? That's just a waste of time and a waste of dollars. And so the more targeted things can be, so as I'm developing programming, thinking product mix, I'm thinking about, well, what can be targeted versus what just has to be generally promoted. So Chris, I think you got another polling question.
All right, let's get this pulled up here. Here we go. Yes, the next question is, do you produce any targeted brochures? And so we'll just give you another minute or so to respond, and then we'll show the results and move on.
When I was talking before about 75% of your dollars being spent on printed promotions, back 5-7 years ago, that number used to be 90%. So definitely we're moving and spending more money and time on e-marketing, social media, that type of thing. One of the other areas people are still doing is advertising, and with advertising we talk about, sort of 0 to 10% of your budget maybe in advertising, but the only advertising that works, be it if it's television, online, radio, whatever it might be, is very specific to a program. Just advertising in general, what you're doing is a waste. So again, as a program professional, when you're working with marketing, you know what your audience is used to. You know what they read, you know what they listen to, etc., so that, again, you can provide guidance for that type of advertising too.
Okay, let's see what we got here for results. Looks like the majority, 54% are doing some targeted brochures.
Great.
25% do it sometimes, and 21% are not doing any targeted brochures at this point.
And that's great. And it'll be interesting, like 5 years from now, what this looks like, because I just see more and more programs are spending more dollars on the targeted piece than on the general piece. Although the general piece still works, what's important on the general piece is that when we're targeting within our community by carrier routes or postal codes, U.S., Canada. And really being clear on what those carrier routes or postal codes are that work for us versus doing mass marketing. Mass marketing, zip code marketing doesn't work. You want to look at carrier routes or postal codes. Again, by analyzing your registration data, LERN can provide you that information about what are the best carrier routes or best postal codes. So we've sort of been talking a little bit about this, but I want to sort of come back on it for just a moment. Clearly, it is your responsibility in programming to handle needs assessment. And so your job, just like the example I gave earlier about the person who asked about what time class should start, it's your job to determine which customers you ought to be doing programming for, what it is they want, and then how it is you're going to deliver it. Those are the three things that are definitely your responsibility, and no one else is doing this but you. You're identifying who your customers are, you're identifying what it is they want, and you're identifying how they want it delivered. And so it's your job to be in touch with your participants. It's your job to know what questions to ask them. It's your job to analyze that data. So just like the person I spoke about found out that 86% of the people wanted the class to start, at 6 o'clock, that's what I mean by analyzing data. I'm not talking about surveys with 900 questions on them. I'm talking about surveys with 1 to 3 questions on them that really help you quickly find out from your students what it is that they want and how they want it delivered, where they want it delivered, etc., so that you can make really good decisions about how you take existing programs and better offer them, or take programming that's new and test it. And so it is important to be able to listen to your customers. It is your job to listen to what frontline staff is hearing, to be looking at evaluations, to be reading, what's out there, what's going on out there, to listen and watch what other programs are doing, and then to utilize focus groups and surveys. So very simply, if I wanted to add some new business classes, I would be listening to what I've heard, frontline evaluations, et cetera, and I'd come up with a list of, 30 options, let's say. Then I would gather a focus group, somewhere between 5 and 12 people. This could be by email, by phone, et cetera. And these people are people who have taken business classes and like your business classes. And I would show them my list, and I would say, what do you think? And then ultimately I'd ask them to brainstorm their own list and vote on it. And let's say they come up with 10 possible new classes. Then I would go out and survey a larger number of people who take business classes and say, pick your top 2, and so whatever the top 3 are the ones I'm going to offer. But this is your job, and this is why I'll talk in a moment later that you've got to get out of the day-to-day, because this is the stuff you need to be doing if you want to make sure you're going to have the right product mix, because this is where you're going to find out what products, how they want it delivered, all that type of information that's going to be critical to be successful. Another area that we need to be thinking a lot about is generations, and as program professionals, that's our job, and we know that there's 4 generations, 3 primary generations that we're dealing with. We're dealing with Generation Y, which is children, people born between 1980 and 2000. And they're primarily either children who are taking children's programming, a lot of our camps and stuff, or these are younger professionals who are now entering continuing professional education. And let me just say that for those of you in programming, this is the future of continuing education. Generation Y in continuing professional education, taking certificate programs and probably taking them online. And so that is the future. You should be looking at how you can build those 3 to 5 certificate programs that you can market around the world. Because probably when it comes to online programming, I'm going to guess that 80% of it's going to be third-party vendors, and it should be. It's that other 20% that you're going to develop that's unique to you, unique to your institution, unique to where you live, unique to expertise, whatever. And it's going to be filling gaps. Because with Generation Y, there are millions of jobs out there. And we want to identify those jobs where there's enough people who need a certification in order to be able to move along in that job or get a job in that area. Generation X is where we've got a lot of our family programming happening as well as continuing professional education. Our baby boomers are shifting, and Generation X is 1965 to 1979. Baby boomers, 1944 to 1964, are shifting out of continuing professional ed and are primarily in community ed. And then veterans, people who were born before 1943, are primarily in community education. And so when we think again about our mix, we're thinking about by generations what is our mix. And one that's not even on here is Generation Z, which are people born from 2000 on. And that group now, this is where we've got our younger kids who are taking programming in some of our continuing ed programs. So we need to think in terms of generations. And when we think of generations, we're thinking about a generation from the point of view of what's the product they want, what's the best way to market to them, and how do they want it delivered. So go back to Generation Y. The product they want are certificate programs. They want it primarily marketed either using e-marketing or SEO, et cetera, tools, and they want it delivered online. Now, that doesn't mean everybody does, but it means that that's probably going to be the most successful way for us, the best way for us to be successful with this group. So another thing that a programming professional needs to do is they need to really understand their generations. One of the things that people ask me a lot about is, well, how much money should I spend on product development? I would argue, and let's use a certificate program as an example, is that if I'm going to build a certificate program, I don't want to spend more than what I am projecting the operating margin to be over 3 years. I don't want to spend more than 10% of that operating margin to build that certificate program. Because why would I put all that money in if I don't feel it's going to be generating enough operating margin coming back? So for example, if I projected over 3 years that this certificate program would generate $120,000, and I projected it would have a 50% operating margin, that means that I'm going to have $60,000 as an operating margin. And so at 10%, it means I can spend about $6,000 in development of this certificate program. Now, you may spend $12,000, but at least you know what the numbers should be. You're not saying to yourself, well, gee, I should be spending $60,000 on this. Because no, if you do that, unless this thing has a life that's going to go on forever, it'll be impossible for this to be profitable. So we need to keep in mind what percentage of money we're spending in development. And then it is always better to contract your development out. You should not be doing development yourself. A programming professional manages programming, does not build curriculum. That is what you contract people to do. And normally you should not contract internally. This should be something that you're not paying someone hourly for, but you're paying them a flat fee to provide something. So we want to think about sort of product development and what those costs are and how they impact what's going on. Regarding energy, your job as a program professional is to generate 6 to 20 times your salary. So if you're getting paid, let's just call it $40,000, I would say that you should be generating at least an average of 12 times your salary, which is about $500,000. Now, you can't generate $500,000 if you're involved in all the day-to-day stuff. So if only 25% of your time goes into programming, then it's only 12 times 25% of your salary that you should be generating. You need to get out of the day-to-day. And as I travel, I will say, and this is one of the things that scares me the most when I'm visiting programs, is normally programming professionals tell me they spend less than 20% of their time in programming. The rest of it is day-to-day stuff, advising, all the types of things that are nice, but these are not things that are generating revenue for the organization. And so you need to be able to spend your time doing that. And that's why I would argue that a good continuing ed unit has more people on the operations side handling that day-to-day stuff, less people on the programming side, and that those people are not in the office. This is the group that's telecommuting. This is the group that's staying away from that day-to-day type stuff. So, Chris, I think this is our last poll question, and then I'm going to wrap up, so go ahead.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Yep, this is the last question. What times their salary do your programming professionals generate? And again, we've got a couple of different options for you to choose from. So if you want to just pick the best or estimate the best one, that would be great. And then we'll read off the answers here, and then finish up and get to your questions.
When I'm on the road, a lot of questions have to do with the structure and how we operate and how we're more efficient and how we can generate more revenue. And this is the #1 question I get. And a lot of programs have made some very significant changes to allow their programming professionals to do their job. But if you are involved in that day-to-day, it becomes very difficult to really be a strong revenue generator.
Okay, let's wrap it up here and see what people had to say. I think a few more people are voting, so I'm just going to give you a few more seconds here. All right, let's see what we got. Okay, so it looks like majority, 44%, are in the 3 to 6% range, 33% less than 3. So we're kind of on that 6% below for the most people, and then 6 to 9 is kind of where the next group falls. Okay. And we have a small percent.
Okay, so that's good. That's good. I mean, I've heard out there a lot of times less than 3, so it's good to see us starting to be in that 3 to 6 range. So in wrapping up, let me just say here are a couple of things that I think you ought to take away from what I've said. Oops. So #1, programming professionals need to realize they have to generate X amount of revenue a year, and they need to understand needs assessment. So as a programming professional, I got revenue goals I got to hit, and I know my job is to be working with my customers and to understand what they want and when they want it. I've got to realize that I have to have a good mix of product, market segments, and delivery methods. Think about that 30% rule, and also think about that 30% rule regarding generations. some programs that I'll review will have 70% of their business by baby boomers. That's a problem because baby boomers will not be here forever. And so we need to have a better mix from our generation point of view too. Repeat rate, being able to track it, being able to know that it's in that 30 to 50% range, critical when it comes to our product mix. Got to do 20% new, got to have a cancellation rate less than 20%, got to have an operating margin of 40% or better. And be able to know what your biggest revenue generators are and be able to target them and have names of people who you're going to promote those to. And then have one new initiative rolled out each year. No, don't do too many new initiatives. Do a good job of selecting what those new initiatives are. And I would say that those things, if we can try to do what's just on this slide, this should ensure that we have a pretty good product mix when we're going out to sell to the marketplace. So Chris, let's see if there's any questions. I know we're coming up close to the top of the hour, so I'll answer them as well as I can.
Sure. I just want to remind people that if you've got any questions, just send those in through the questions box on the toolbar, and we'll spend the last few minutes here answering your questions. So one just general question is, you mentioned, I think in one of the slides, the initial CPE. If you could just explain what those stand for.
Oh, I'm sorry. CPE is continuing professional education. So continuing professional ed, community education. So continuing professional ed would be more your career-oriented type programming. Sometimes people call it workforce.
Okay. Another question we have is, when considering salary, does this include benefits?
No. Great question. This would just be your salary. And again, remember, take a look at the amount of time you're actually programming. So if your salary was $50,000, but you're really only programming 50% of the time, then the salary you're going to take is $25,000 and multiply that by 12.
Just another general question. So if one of the product areas is kind of consistently over 30%, but this continues to be your kind of your main revenue driver, do you recommend cutting back in this area or adding in other areas?
No, I would not cut back in it. I would actually, if I can grow it, I'd want to grow it. I would just realize that I need to start to build revenue in other areas. And I'll be honest with you, it could take upwards to 3 years before you were to get that below 30%. Let's say, you know, your business classes are at 50%. It could take 3 years before that comes down because it takes time to build these new product areas and get them up and running.
All right, another one we have here. Is there a direct relationship between revenue generated and population served in the region, such as a community college?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would certainly say that in a smaller community, the revenue that you can generate is probably going to be less. But let me just tell you that I have been to some of the bigger cities and seen their community colleges and worked with their community colleges, and then go to programs in much smaller populations, 1 million or less, and those community colleges are doing more business. So I would argue, yes, a larger urban environment should be able to do more, but that's not always true. And the reason the ones that are in a smaller environment are doing better is because they're doing a lot of the things we just talked about.
All right, well, it looks like that's all the questions we have. Oh, I'm sorry, we got another one that just came in. How do you generate names for a new initiative?
Well, I mean, part of that is when you're going through that new initiative. So, for example, you know, I'm going to do a new initiative, let's just say summer camp, the one I was talking about. And I think this is something I should do. Well, the assumption would be is that part of my research would be identifying, well, how am I going to get names to market to? And so, you know, I may make various decisions about how to get those names, but it's geared towards whatever that product is. So there's not a magic like I call somebody and they give me the names, but it's like I wouldn't build a certificate program for something that I knew there wasn't a job out there for, that I could go out and get names. Now, if we're looking just to rent names, there are mailing houses, and that's what they do. You contact the mailing house, and the mailing house then, you give them whatever the criteria is you're looking for. You know, I want, you know, males, I want them between this age range, I want them that have graduated from college and that their degree was in environmental science, because you're doing some environmental science certificate program. They can get that list for you, and then you can mail to that list.
Okay, it looks like that's all the questions we have, and we are pretty much at the top of the hour here at 2 o'clock, so I think with that we'll probably wrap things up. Just to remind people, we are recording this, and we'll provide the webinar slides on our website, and that link is augiesoft.net/webinar, and we'll also be sending an email out to everybody with that reminder too. So I know a couple people had questions about that. So with that, I think we're ready to sign off. And Greg, just wanted to thank you for taking the time to, again, present another great topic for us. And if anybody has any questions or want to follow up with Greg, I think at the next slide you have the contact information for yourself. And so that's how you can get a hold of Greg. And if anybody is interested, of course, in learning more or seeing a demo of Lumens, we'd be more than happy to set you up for that. And you can either contact our sales department at sales@augiesoft.net, or you can just go to our website and fill out one of our forms there. So Greg, did you have any closing?
I would strongly encourage that if you haven't, because you want to make sure that you're using the right software. And Learn and Augiesoft have worked very closely together to ensure that a lot of the things that I talked about today, that Lumens is supporting. So I think that, having the right software is one of the 7 key critical things for being a successful continuing ed unit. So you should just look at it and make sure that you compare it to whatever you're using today.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you. And I think with that, we'll sign off. So thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.